Everybody got enough refreshments to keep them going. This won't be terribly long. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending tonight. I'd like to give my final presidential address as President of the Society. And tonight I'll be talking on a topic quite different from the one I gave last year on the Ordovician. This one is on geoparks and related areas around the world established for their natural and cultural attributes. And you'll see right at the end the part that the Linnean Society of New South Wales has had to play in this particular topic. Now, I mentioned in the title related sites, and you'd be far more familiar with the term World Heritage Site than you probably are with the term geoparks. Both of them have UNESCO connotations. They are both evaluated by UNESCO. There is a network of sites that UNESCO basically oversees and evaluates. But World Heritage Sites are more familiar to the general public. They are higher in the international conservation hierarchy than are geoparks. The nomination is far more rigorous. Generally, they are things that are seen as unique in the world or entirely world famous. And there is an emphasis on cultural icons, such things as the pyramids, the Sydney Opera House, for example, as well as on natural features, which isn't always the case, although there is some overlap with geoparks. Just to refresh your memory, here are the Australian World Heritage Sites as listed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. And there is quite a diverse range of these. There's 20 sites currently indicated on the list, and they range from ones with a fairly substantial geographic spread, such things as the Gondwana rainforest, for example, extends from Barrington Tops and includes all the rainforests right through the ranges up as far as the border ranges, Mount Lamington and that area of the border of Queensland and New South Wales. Other extensive ones, Tasmanian Wilderness, Willandra Lakes, and then you've got the various national parks that you can see there. The Barrier Reef is possibly one of the most famous World Heritage Sites that Australia has. But there are also sites that consist of single items, such as the Sydney Opera House and the Royal Exhibition Building in the Carlton Gardens in Melbourne, where the first Parliament was held after Australia became its own country from 1901 to 1927. That's where the Parliament was held. There are also sites which are spread widely over the country, such as the Australian convict sites. And that includes things like Hyde Park Barracks, Cockatoo Island, the Great North Road, that's just in the Sydney area, as well as Port Arthur. They include Kingston, the convict-built site Kingston on Norfolk Island, and even Fremantle Prison over here in the west. So that, and also we've got several of the subantarctic islands are included in the World Heritage List. These don't get added to very rarely. They're really highly evaluated to get onto the list. There was a site added, the last one added was the Bootjum Bin cultural landscape, the Aboriginal eel catching or fish catching traps in Victoria. And there are two sites that are currently under evaluation or proposed. The front runner currently is the Flinders Ranges site in South Australia, and the Kimberley region, I understand, is the next one being evaluated, but that's evaluated internally in Australia before they even get proposed, and that takes years. So that's the other sites, related sites. But geoparks, and the rest of the talk will concentrate on geoparks. Geoparks are also ones that have a UNESCO overarching evaluation and listing criteria. They are scattered around the world, in some places more concentrated than others, in some places concentrated nil. There are some countries in the world which have absolutely no geoparks. And I've listed down the right margin the number of sites in individual countries as of, well, this is most recent as I can get, the end of last year just into this, the country with the maximum number of geoparks in its jurisdiction or its geographic area is China with 41 of those sites. There's also a great spread of sites in Europe, and throughout the rest of the world they're very few and far between. There are 2 in Africa, for example. So, I've mentioned where they are. What are they? Well, the UNESCO definition is a territory, and so it's more than just a single site, and that's one of the differentiations from a World Heritage Site, or some of the World Heritage Sites. It's a territory encompassing one or more sites of scientific significance, and they're significant not only for their geological reasons, which is one of the primary features of them, but not by any means the only feature, but also their archaeological, ecological or cultural value. The word geopark has connotations to many people of being a geological park. Not so. It is more in the sense of geos, the earth. It is more widespread in its connotations. There is a program run out of UNESCO called the Global Geoparks Network, and as that suggests, it is a network of all of those geoparks which qualify under the UNESCO definition and ownership, if you like, of this particular group of natural features. This network aims at enhancing the value of such sites and at the same time creating employment and promoting regional economic development. That's another really significant difference from World Heritage Sites. These parks actually bring in the local inhabitants, the local trades, the local employment, and have a significant input into the economic development of such areas. They bring in tourists, for example. UNESCO is aiming for up to 500 geoparks to be established worldwide. At the present, there are 177 geoparks established internationally, and they are increasing at the rate of 3 to 4 per year. What is the point of having geoparks? Well, the things in favour is that they create public awareness of geodiversity, ecology, landscape, culture and archaeology. Quite a few of those are actually aligned with the aims and objectives of the society, and as we've just approved, in fact, in the bylaws and the rules. They protect vulnerable geological and particularly paleontological sites, and in some instances mineralogical sites. Those things that actually would be stripped bare had not some protection being offered. And very importantly, they promote tourism, in particular geotourism. That is, tourists who go there to see geological features, landscapes, as well as enjoying the culture, the history of the sites as well. There are some negative connotations. This having been part of a UNESCO network involves an added level of legislative complexity and responsibility. There are problems if you've got some sites that are in public versus private ownership in particular. And this idea of this oversight by external evaluators that potentially usurps the local legislation has in fact been the downfall of the only Australian geopark to have been actually proposed and is no longer. So that is a very, very important, and I'll deal with that later on in the talk, that is a very important negative connotation of being part of UNESCO. You will have heard that UNESCO evaluators come out and look at the Great Barrier Reef, or at the World Heritage Site, for example, of the Blue Mountains, and if they feel that the site is under any sort of threat, then that can be a detrimental effect on having the thing continuing to be listed. The evaluations take place on a regular basis every 10 to 15 years. And so if the site is not maintained, if it is not fulfilling the ambitions and ideals of being a part of that network, it doesn't stay there, and I'll show an example of that shortly. So, there are three main parts of the idea of a geopark promoting good well-being and good features. And the first one is conservation. So it ensures that there are adequate protection measures put up by the management authority. And these can be in consultation with various experts in the field, such as universities, geological surveys, and a lot of these are geological, of course, or relevant statutory bodies, and in accordance with local traditions and legislative obligations. As you would appreciate, something that is worldwide has a multiplicity of various local traditions and legislative obligations to try and get around. An important aspect is the education. A geopark, by necessity, must communicate geoscientific knowledge and environmental concepts, geodiversity, biodiversity, what have you, to the public through a variety of ways. It can be on the web, can have set up information centres that people can visit, museums. It can have a series of geotrails linking sites that people can then, on their touristing, go through and look at various sites with interpretation signs to increase the education of the visitors. And a geopark also fosters scientific research by allowing researchers to go in there, often under licences, and they cooperate with the universities, the research institutes and the government departments who are in part responsible for the initial evaluation and setup of the geopark. And finally, there is geotourism. It stimulates economic activity and sustainable development, and that's very important under UNESCO-wise. In underdeveloped nations or developing nations, this can be a path to getting dollars or any sort of currency actually into a particular area and supporting the local economy. So the development of the geopark concept, it's been going for about 20 years. There was initially in 2000 the European Geoparks network was established. And that's why there's still quite a concentration of geoparks on the European part of the world. And there was the first involvement of UNESCO, which saw this as a good thing, was in 2001 when there was a cooperation with between UNESCO and the European Geoparks network. But in 2004, the whole thing really got going by the amalgamation, essentially, of the European Geoparks network, consisting at the time of 17 parks, and the 8 Chinese geoparks, which had developed quite independently, but they also saw this as a good thing for their geotourism and other sorts of tourism and so forth. And so this was really the establishment, less than 20 years ago, that the global geopark network really got going as a global entity. And so from this 25 geoparks, when it was established, we now have, as I mentioned, 177 geoparks established worldwide. That's pretty rapid growth, and they occur in 46 countries, not in Australia. So, summarising all that, and I've been through, yes, you can see the highlighted points, and I've mentioned all of those. That's just so that you can bring it all together that I've just been speaking about on multiple slides. And so that is what a geopark stands for. Where are they situated? Well, this was, and I haven't been able to find a 2004 version of the European Geoparks network, but this was one 4 years after the setup of the Global Geoparks network, when you'll remember there were 17 European ones. There's now 32 as of 2008 operating, and they have actually been concentrated in the UK, where you can see through there, Central Europe through Germany, in particular there, and notice that there's only a few and these numbers are the numbers referring to the sites. They are not the numbers of geoparks in the area. Just a few in the Iberian Peninsula. Contrast that with the situation in 2022, a year ago, just over a year ago, and we had 94 geoparks in Europe. And you can see that particularly the Spaniards and the Portuguese really got into this. And you can see the number of stars there indicating a substantial increase in the number of geoparks in their area. Central Europe has just perhaps doubled. UK has pretty much stayed very similar to what it was in that previous slide of 2004. Iceland, a marvellous place to visit, and you've got 2 there. Probably the whole island could be declared as a geopark, but anyway, they're doing fairly well with 2. And there's quite a few through Scandinavia and so forth. There's one over there in Russia. We won't mention that again. Apparently the Russians sort of initially thought, good idea, and then none. And so that's just one there. But otherwise it's spread fairly evenly throughout. Quite a few. Cyprus, for example, the Troodos complex there, which is famed for its seafloor and the copper association there. Many throughout the length of Italy, and quite a few through Greece, and some of the Azores and the offshore islands there. And so you, as some of you would have travelled quite a lot in this area perhaps, you may or may not have actually walked into the area of a geopark, and sometimes without noticing it, because the signs are fairly small in some instances. Unless you go to a specific site, you have quite possibly been in that external area of a geopark, and so you visited. You are geotourists. Let's look at some that actually I've got to, and there's not a lot. But the Northwestern Highlands Geopark in Scotland was one of the earliest ones that was set up in the UK. Doesn't tend to be a lot of botany here, folks. It's just the way it is. But it certainly has got some outstanding geology. And some of the oldest rocks in the UK, the Lewisian gneiss, some of these going back into the Archean, one of its highlights of its geological features. The scenery is well and truly developed as a glacial landscape, and you can quite readily see that. Extremely spectacular. As regards the zoology, well, I can attest to the fact that there's billions of midges around the shores of these. As to the rest, I'm sure there's some nice elk and deer and so forth like that. But anyway, the geology is one of its highlights. So that's the Northwest Highlands Geopark. This one in Portugal, and it's known as the Park of the Giant Trilobites. And you can see, and this guy here is Richard Fortey from the Natural History Museum, whom you might have seen in various TV shows and so forth, world expert on trilobites. These things are perhaps 10 to 20 times larger than your normal average trilobite. They are dirty big trilobites. And they come from a quarry, or a series of quarries, which are just down here. And so here's an excursion. So that's part of the educational process and the research process. And the whole of the area, well, I'm not sure how far it extends, the whole of the area is very scenic, several villages, lots of local handcrafts, for example. And to introduce you to the area, this monument, and that's a fake one, that's a bronze one, is in the roundabout on the approaches to the village. So it's a big thing, geotourism there. So that's another one. And then another one, and Helen and I walked into this one completely unawares because we were on a tour of Greece and Turkey, and there was a problem with a rack railway. I would have loved to have travelled on the rack railway because it goes across this gorge here, which is, they have their archaeological associations, it was cleft by Hercules. Not too many geoparks can say that, but unfortunately the rack railway was not running, but instead the guide took us to the Lake of the Caves, and there is the geopark symbol. And this is an amazing set of caves here. I try and get everybody in the audience interested in various things. So this is a lovely cave here that has got dead still water. Beautiful, and you can walk all through on these various trackways and so forth. But that's one in Greece. Now, I mentioned earlier that if you can get bumped from being in the Geopark network. And here's a case in point, John will know this. This is one that was actually sitting on the boundary of Italy and Austria. And it was the Carnic Alps Geopark, and it was in the European Geopark network. And it was there for several years. And it even had a Geopark visitor centre in Dallach in Austria. And that's Hans-Peter Schumacher there, who is the director of it, an Austrian Canadian worker. And this was a great area, lots of nice tourism, lots of lovely local villages and towns. And for whatever reason, and I'm not sure of the reason, you can't find it on the European Geoparks network, it's not on the Global Geoparks network. It fell out of favour. I'm not quite sure what happened, but it's no longer a geopark. And that proves that the evaluation process that UNESCO runs is actually quite severe, and it is quite, they don't take it. If something goes wrong, you're out. So, now, I mentioned that there were 41 in China. I've been to one, and you will recognise this, I'm sure. If I can press it right, yeah.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
I've been there. You've been there, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. Now, forgive my pronunciation. Zhangjiajie, and it was used as the setting for Avatar. This is where all the pillars were up in the floating mountains, were up in the clouds. And as you can see, we were actually there on a day where the clouds came down to meet the pillars. But to get up there, well, you can't get up to every single one, but the Chinese have installed a 132 metre high stainless steel 3-cage glass lobby things, lifts that take you up to the top surface, and then you catch a bus and you can go around and walk right on the edge of some of these plateaus and look down into the clouds. 18 million Chinese visitors a year. It is one of the most popular geoparks in the world. So if you have the chance, it's in central eastern China in Hunan province. So that is one in China. So just reiterating, the places around the world where there are geoparks. And so another version of that is where a geopark's located and more to the point where they are not. And this is very instructive. So this scale goes from 1 to 21 to 41 in the colours. A bit weird, but it's very illustrative. It comes from a paper in 2023, so it's right up to date. 41 sites throughout China, 15 just in Spain, 7 in France, 8 Germany, and so forth. 5 in Canada. I mentioned the one in Russia. Just a handful in South America. 2 in Mexico. 2 in Africa. Does anyone notice several countries which are rather blank?
United States.
United States hasn't got any. Australia doesn't currently have any. And Greenland doesn't. Yes, India doesn't, and most of Africa. So, yes, why is this so?
Why is it so?
And all of those places that you're mentioning are well and truly, you would expect to have good candidates for geoparks. There must be some reason. Okay, this is previously, no longer, Australia's only geopark. And I think it was set up in about 2008, and it was set up with several precincts. It's ones that goes across the border from Victoria into South Australia. Many famous sites are there, not the 12 Apostles and Lockhart Gorge, that's in Port Campbell National Park. not Grampians National Park, and not Narracourt Caves up here, which is part of the World Heritage Vertebrate site in association with Riversleigh up in Queensland. And that might give you some idea of what went wrong. That the people setting this up were very well intentioned, and they got the local councils on side. They had to do a lot of negotiating with local groups and residents and so forth, and tourist authorities, for example, Mount Gambier in there. But they missed out on quite a few of the national parks. And they also missed out on federal government approval. And so some of the representative features, and I'm sure many of you might have been to some of these, Mount Shank, which is just near the coast of South Australia. It's Australia's youngest, one of Australia's youngest volcanoes, because there is other volcanic activity which might be not too distantly related in Queensland and so forth. This one's about 5,200 years as the oldest, as the most recent volcanism episode. Various fossilised, supposedly fossilised forests, big floodplains of lava, various craters sticking out of the area in the newer volcanic province, and this is a blister of lava that sort of flowed up and then solidified before it flowed across the country. Great features. So, regrettably, they didn't have federal government authority, and as a result of which, when UNESCO evaluators came in to actually give approval to this as part of the global Geoparks network, no, you're not welcome. You're not coming in. You're not giving us any. You're not telling us what to do. That sort of thing. So regrettably, this one is no longer listed as a geopark. Not an Australian geopark. It doesn't have the right to the name. So let that be a lesson to establishing a geopark. You have to meet the very stringent criteria determined by UNESCO. There has to be a management plan. The sustainable socio-economic development, most likely based on geotourism, but can be based on other things. The need for demonstrating methods of conserving and enhancing the geological heritage. The educational aspects, the teaching of the geoscientific disciplines and the broader environmental issues. Finally, the joint approvals have to be submitted by public authorities, local communities and private interests. That's great. Private, public authorities has to indicate government. If you don't have government on side, why bother? Because you're not going to get it established. And so there is a rigorous evaluation process starting off with groups of candidates that are called aspiring geoparks. So you become an aspiring geopark with a management plan, you get evaluated by a series of experts over some time, a couple of years, and then eventually, if you are successful, you will become welcomed into the full Geoparks network. It takes a while, and it has to have a lot of approvals. So the Australian experience was that Ganawinka Geopark was established and then disestablished. And so proponents of future geoparks, and there are quite a few opportunities in Australia for future geoparks. They are aware of this. They have the benefit of the hindsight of that failed experience. And so they advocate not using the word geopark, which has got perhaps negative connotations in terms of Ganawinka. So they are suggesting we use the word georegion, right? Nothing to do with parks, as the preferential term for gathering support. You have to ensure that all three government levels are involved, informed and on side. So there is a lot of legwork to be done in getting the proposal together, the management plan together, getting people on side to support. In Australia, the georegion is largely the same definition as a geopark, and it involves a slightly different concept in which individual sites are linked by a geotrail network to then be built into the geo-region, and then potential geopark projects from the local Western Australia, and the Ku-ring-gai georegion in northern Sydney. Final slide. This is where the Linnean Society comes into it. Because last year at our symposium in northern Sydney, we actually had a half-day session devoted to establishing the credentials, both natural and cultural, of the Ku-ring-gai georegion. And it eventuated in having a review paper of some 98 pages published by the Society in its proceedings, and that is available for free download off the Society's webpage, but you can also purchase it as a high quality, beautifully printed, with its own cover, which this is, review paper in itself for something of the vicinity of $20 to $25, I'm not quite sure what the current price is, through places like STEP, the Society, the South Turramurra Environmental Protection Society, and so forth. I'm sure if you Google this, you'll find out where you can purchase it, a limited print one. So there is the extent of geoparks around the world, the extent or non-extent of georegions in Australia, and the potential that has been guided by the Linnean Society, I'm pleased to say, for establishing our own aspiring geopark in Australia. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Oh, sorry, I'm usurping your role.
You can relax.
Okay.
Ian obviously is quite happy to answer any questions, but I think first I'd just say that a lot of this symposium was down to Ian's efforts. He was the main person putting it all together, and we owe him a great debt of gratitude for taking the lead on this. But any questions?
Paul?
In the United States, right from the beginning of all government conservation with national parks, they did have national monuments, which were fundamental. And of course, Trump undid and sold off quite a lot of the national monuments. And Trump, I doubt, would want anybody from UNESCO coming and getting around them.
That is the problem, yes. Yes, you're completely correct. There's a multiplicity of sites that I could have mentioned that were related sites, and I only chose, because of the time constraints, to mention one or two. But yes, you're right. Special sites of special scientific interest in the UK. There's another one, national monuments in the US, and there are a multiplicity of natural sites in various countries that have their own names and so forth. But none of them, they're individual things. Some of them are natural landscapes and so forth, but most of them do not conform fully with the criteria for recognition of a geopark. But that's not to say that they couldn't be modified to do that. Yes?
Bruce?
Yeah, sorry. My particular interest is in caves, a la karst, and we have a whole scattering of karst areas around New South Wales, a lot of which are very poorly protected. How is there any way that all of those karst areas can fit into a geopark, even though they're very widely scattered?
This is where geoparks tend to differ
Or
from...
georegions,
Georegions,
yeah.
geoparks,
Sorry.
tend to differ from the World Heritage ones, because you can have scattered sites as part of a themed World Heritage thing, concentrated on specific sites, but they can be, states separated in states or by seas, in fact, the one in Norfolk Island. But normally a georegion, geopark, is what it says. It is a defined region, and that is within the definition. So yes, you could have things with the karst around, say, Burrinjuck, that sort of area, but trying to join up, say, Jenolan and Timor up in the Timor Caves up in the
Yes, sir. Yeah.
would be a difficult proposition because it's not an identifiable region. You might have better luck with, say, Abercrombie and a few of those central western ones, possibly, if you could join in between. But yeah, that's not as easy as you might think.
No.
They could be, you could have individual ones, like Jenolan could be a centrepiece of another georegion or something like that. But joining all the casts as, like, you couldn't do it like the Australian Rainforest World Heritage Thing, as a series of scattered rainforests going all the way up to the border ranges. No. But the dinosaur trail, for example, that has been established already as a geotourism highlight up in central northern Queensland, which is, you've got the Australian Age of Dinosaurs Museum, Kronosaurus Corner. Lots of you would have possibly seen or been to the places where they're finding and digging out large, huge boned dinosaurs, complete in some instances, and marine reptiles, has developed into a series of towns like Winton, Hughenden, Richmond, and so forth, and Lark Quarry, another one, the dinosaur footprints one. And that could be developed quite readily into a georegion because it is a definable region, spread over a long way, but you've got a series of points that you could link as a geotrail. Makes a lot of sense. And it would be a fantastic benefit to the local communities up there. Peter and then Robert.
In I don't know too much about the process, but my understanding is that the Australian government, through the Heritage Council, is very much involved in World Heritage nominations.
Yes.
Is there, or does the Heritage Council in Australia have any interest in geoparks? And if they don't, is there a Commonwealth organisation or authority which would be in a position to sponsor these sorts of proposals?
I suspect that the experience with Kanawinka has made federal government bodies shy away from such things. They see more international kudos perhaps in World Heritage sites, and that's why the heritage area of, I'm not quite sure which government department it would be, if it's science or technology and so on.
Environment.
It's environment.
Yeah.
They're now looking at Flinders,
Yeah.
and they've been looking at Flinders for perhaps 4 or 5 years, and they're looking at not only the scenery of the rocks and so forth, but such sites as the Ediacara fossil site on Nilpena in particular, and a number of other things. And it comes down, of course, into the wine region, and so you've got, it's all set up basically, and it just requires it to be put together as a package. But that is going to be put as a proposed World Heritage area because it ticks more boxes. So the georegion is a concept, and then geopark is a concept yet to be accepted by the federal government. And I don't know of anyone that's actually in those areas that is actively involved. However, in connection with the Ku-ring-gai georegion, Angus Robinson and the organisation called FOLK, Friends of Ku-ring-gai Environment, have been doing a lot of work getting state government instrumentalities on side, local members, and I mean, we're going to have an election on Saturday, but there's a lot of work being done already with getting the people, the local members in the northern Sydney area rather, involved, supportive, and Angus Robinson has been handing out these things, the reprints of these, and people are just amazed that it's all there, the Aboriginal history, the zoology, the botany, geology, cultural history and everything. And I think it hasn't been pursued because they didn't realise it. And so this is the educational aspects of trying to get everybody on side. To get the federal government on side, really you have to have the state governments on side first. You have to have local authorities first. You have to have state government departments like the Geological Survey is on side. So then comes the federals.
That question relates a lot with mine, but yeah, I think probably the Tourism Australia might be a good organisation to work towards this. But my question was, how long has the idea of geoparks been around? When did UNESCO come up with that?
Geoparks were first formulated around about the year 2000. There was a conference in France, I think, started off, conference on the history of the memory of Earth. It had funny, probably was better worded in the French.
Probably sounds better in French.
Sorry, my voice is going because I've been speaking to them. But that's the history of the whole concept. What, 23 years?
Still early days.
It's got some, yes, still early days. 177 out of the 500 that there is their target. Long way to go. A lot of opportunities in Australia if only we meet the criteria and get the right people on site.
Yes, it's remarkable, in fact, what's been achieved in just 25 years, given it's an international effort. I mean, it all moves so slowly.
So I take it many people in the audience didn't know of Geoparks before this talk.
Yeah, or the symposium. Yeah.
Well, all the symposium. So there we are. We're it's part of our local bit of education and so forth is working, and hopefully you will be the beneficiaries in future years when they do open some of these things, and or go overseas and see how they are treated overseas, and then bring your enthusiasm back home.
Indeed. Right, well, unless there are any other questions, I'd like to call on John Barkers to propose a vote of thanks to Ian.
Well, let's start. As we know, Ian completes a 2.5-year term as President of the Society this evening, with having had to navigate this unusual liaison with the Australian charities authorities because our Act of the New South Wales Colonial Parliament wasn't good enough for them. There are other things about Ian's association with the Society that I should also remind people of. He has served 35 years, I understand, as the Society's Treasurer, and a quick meeting of the Society Grange Trust earlier, we are pretty sure that this eclipses the previous record set by Joyce Pickering, and of course it's to the Society's benefit that Ian is not going to retire from that position tonight.
I can't get a successor here.
Yes, well, I mean, when we look up the records, we see that you joined the council of the Society, I think it was 1986, and as a young whippersnapper, you were persuaded to volunteer to take over from Alex Ritchie as the treasurer in about 1987, and yes, it's been impossible to remove you from that position. Look, I've known Ian for over 50 years, I think I said this last year too, and I have followed his diverse career with great interest in industry, in academia, in public service with the Geological Survey of New South Wales, and of course in promoting the cultivation of natural history in all its branches through endeavours, not only the Linnean Society, but also his interest in geoheritage. And I say, with this long knowledge of Ian, I recall when he was appointed, he's actually been quite a sort of pioneer in this area. He was appointed in the late 1970s to be the sort of curator or the compiler of the geological heritage of New South Wales, and that resulted in the publication of the first of a series of books taking account of that. And I mean, it really is quite a remarkable career. Paleontologists achieve a particular kind of immortality, and I won't leave you with a factoid. I'll have to refer to my notes. But the next time you encounter a conodont called Athalognasus Percival, you'll be able to say, well, I know who that was named after. This insight that we've had, this this is a long-standing interest, as I say, in geological heritage from someone who inherited the role of the New South Wales government paleontologist. I think, like other sort of government titles like Master in Lunacy, have been involved probably a good few.
My predecessor is in there.
Yes, well, there we go. New South Wales government paleontologist, that would have been a nice, that would have been a nice sort of sign off. But look, this is an area that I didn't know anything about. And the way Ian can just stand up here and spout it all forth, answer questions with aplomb, the same ability that he's shown in his roles with the society and these other areas where, as I say, he's established an eminent and international career. I think it really speaks to who Ian really is. And I'd like to invite you all to join me in thanking him for his service to the society, obviously, but also for the insights that he's given us tonight into this rather fascinating and at least to me, little known area. You're obviously an advocate for this, for geopreservation and for education and for the other things that you've said. More power to you in the next part of your career. Ian, thank you very much indeed. Can you?
Well, thank you, Ian, again, and thank you, John, for a very nice appraisal of Ian's illustrious career. And he continues to be an important member of this society, and we hope he'll continue as treasurer for a long time to come. That's the last of the activities for tonight. We do have that second meeting, which we do need 12.8 people members present at in a few weeks' time. And